been looking at one or two videos, particularly yours, Matt, on Now Out That, and Brother Mick Mac, your response to Be Serious, and indeed To Be Serious, your video on science and religion. And I suppose I'm picking up on some of the things that Matt was talking about here, which is to do with what he refers to as spiritual science. And I'd say right off the bat, I have a big problem with that as a phrase, but I don't mind going there. Spiritual science, I suppose, but yeah. Let's just see if I can think of what I'm talking about. I'm partly being influenced here by one of Professor Anton's videos as well, actually, on this topic, in which he's talking about spirituality in relation to language. I might be over-reading or misreading what you're saying there, Corey, but in that you're talking about the relationship, at least, between the meaning-generating potential of language, by which I assume you mean verbal and written language, but which I'm extending to mean other kinds of expressive forms, and including perhaps a language of thought, which I think is a contender for some sort of relationship to that term spirituality. Okay, so that's what's coming into that. And oh god, okay, an example. There's a book called View from the Centre of the Universe, which I mentioned ages ago in one of these videos, by Joel Primack and Nancy Abrams. Joel Primack is a astrophysicist. He was involved in dark energy research, I think. And Nancy Abrams, I think is his wife actually, is a science journalist, but a qualified scientist as well. So they're not completely bogus, these folk. And that book, View from the Centre of the Universe, is kind of an attempt to restore a kind of place for humanity in what would often be thought of as a kind of depersonalised, sterile, kind of machine-like, in its worst sense in that word, universe. Because I think they're kind of picking up on those fears which have inherited since Newton and Descartes, really, to do with if the universe is this. It is not this set of concentric circles created by God with ourselves in this unique place at the centre of it. It's not that. And it is this either infinite or at least very bloody large expanse of some kind of space with these motes of dust floating around it, subject to impersonal forces. If that's kind of all it is, then is there an existential crisis associated with that? And of course there have been existential crises associated with that, people have said, at least. The whole unweaving the rainbow thing, or the criticism that Pascal made of Newton in just that kind of regard, really. And of course that's linked up to religious faith as well, but leaving that aside for now. So with all that in place, this what could be seen as a modern version of the universe as being deeply impersonal, vast, with no one place being any more special than any other place, no one form of existence being any more important than any other form of existence, no one time being any more important than a time. In that kind of a universe, why we would be significant? What's the point? You know what I mean? If we're just a grain of sand on an infinite beach, what's the point? That's the kind of sentiment that goes along with it. So this book, View from the Centre of the Universe, has an ambition to address that. And I'll say right now, I'm deeply conflicted about this book. In some ways it's great, because it does mobilise reasonably good science, and does quite interesting things with that science. On the other hand, it does feel a little bit chauvinistic. Other than make us feel better, what's the point, really? And is that really a solution to an existential crisis? Just make yourself feel better. But anyway, that aside, the way it does it is quite interesting. The way it does it is by mobilising language, and particularly and the language of thought, and particularly by mobilising the kinds of metaphors that we use, and the figurative language and figurative images that we use to think about the universe. If we do think about the universe in a way which is impersonal, in which we are grains of sand on an infinite beach, that's an image which is colouring our sense of our relationship to the universe, and our own sense of purpose, or sense of who we are and what we're for, all that kind of stuff. But if that image can be replaced with another image without fucking up the data, without telling lies about the universe, then we might feel better about ourselves. And as I say, the question is moot about whether we should feel better about ourselves, whether that's a worthwhile goal, but that's the goal of the book, kind of. An example of that is the data about the amount of stuff there is in the universe. Now, because the amount of stuff, and by stuff I mean the stuff that I'm surrounded by here, you know, the matter of the world, which for us is really important. You know, we are made of matter. Everything we know and love is made of matter. Without matter, we cease to exist. You know, all that kind of stuff. You know, and the facts are that matter is a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of the stuff in the universe. You know, most of the universe, most of the mass of the universe, apparently, is dark matter or dark energy or something like that. Most of it's that stuff. And only a very, very tiny, minuscule proportion of the universe, of the mass of the universe, the matter in the universe, is made up of this stuff, physical material, you know, molecules and elements. And of that, the vast majority of that is hydrogen and helium. Only a tiny amount of it is composed of, you know, does compose itself into the heavier elements, the stuff that we are made of. And of that, only a tiny amount constructs itself into elements that can form kind of chemical bonds and do that kind of stuff. And of that, tiny, tiny, tiny amounts can get complex enough to do this stuff, really. And then when you add the complexity of the things like the brain onto that is capable of doing this thing called consciousness, apparently, well, then you're just talking about well, like a real needle in an infinite haystack. It's just an almost insignificant, well, completely insignificant in material terms, amount of stuff. You know, it's almost like a homeopathic proportions of material in the actual universe. There's a way of looking at that, which is, as I say, quite existentially trying. You know, the universe is vast and huge, and our material existence within that is just like a speck of paint or a tiny little splattered fly on the windscreen of a huge car. It's insignificant. That's one way of looking at it. But in this book, what they do with that, which is kind of interesting, is they map it differently. They give a visual image of the proportions of material in the universe, and the image they use is a triangle or a pyramid. It's a pyramid, really, pyramid. And so they have this pyramid, and then the bottom 2/3 of it is dark energy or dark matter. I can't remember which. So you see that, and then the bit above that, you know, a little bit of a truncated cone above that, is matter, but mostly hydrogen and helium. And then a little bit above that is more complex matter, you know, the heavier elements. And then right at the top, just a tiny little pointy bit at the top of the pyramid, is matter that's complex enough to give rise to brains and consciousness. So it's a tiny amount in the great scheme of things, but because of the way it's visually arrayed, it has a different kind of effect. And in fact, they repurpose that image as a kind of mnemonic, as something to remember, by redrawing it as the eye in the pyramid symbol, you know, the one that's found in the dollar bill and elsewhere. And it's a pyramid with a little triangle floating, the top little bit just kind of floating loose with a picture of an eye in it, to represent consciousness and self-reflexivity that we appear to have. And that's a way of visually remembering that the amount of matter in the universe is tiny in the great scheme of things. But just because it's presented in that way, rather than presented in the grain of the sand on a beach way, it feels kind of special. You know what I mean? It feels like all this dark stuff at the bottom, the great base of the pyramid, is kind of somehow supporting these more complex elements, and in turn those more complex elements are kind of supporting the complexity of something like a brain and consciousness. And because it's at the top, it feels, because of other kind of metaphorical associations we have, it feels kind of closer to, it feels superior, literally superior, on top of, but also closer to the things that we value. You know, we value things that are higher, and we have a great sense of quality being up. You know, good things are up, because we've placed that smidgen of material at the top of this pyramid of what's going on in the world, then we've given ourselves a position, a metaphorical position of quality and goodness. So it's fascinating. It does kind of work, you know what I mean? When you see yourself like that, it does, if you're not too analytical about the metaphors that are being mobilised, it does make you think slightly differently about the position of humankind and life more generally in the universe than, as I say, than that exactly same data laid out in a way which just says that we are a tiny amount in a vast sea of other stuff. Yeah, as I say, I'm very dubious about why you would want to. I think it's important to know that you are being manipulated by the metaphors that bring the data to life. And when we do bring data to life, particularly in a visual image like the way I've just described, it does change the way you perceive that data. And I do think it's useful to keep alive to that, really. What do you think, Mr. Tree?